Good morning and welcome again to Remote Bible Class. This morning we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 13, so turn over there if you will. I don't know what you're doing this week. I don't know how you've been. I don't know what this shelter in place has you doing. One of the things it has me doing is teaching yet another DeLoach how to drive. And it's a lot of fun, I got to tell you. Taking young Max out on mostly empty roads. He achieved a speed of 75 miles an hour last week, so that was pretty fun, pretty exciting. And I'm struck with all the memories of the previous DeLoach children that I have educated on the skill of driving. And I'm reminded, with what we're going to be discussing today in 1 Peter chapter 2, of something that I've mentioned before in Bible class that Sydney did, which I think was magnificent. I really loved it. When I was teaching her about yielding, the idea of yielding, it was a word that in her young vernacular she had not used that often. It doesn't come up very often except for in baking or driving situations, and Sydney wasn't familiar with the word. And so we talked about it, and I explained to her that yielding basically meant that somebody had to give way or wait on you before they could go. They had to give you room. And so as we were coming through Bentonville one time, I noticed she was speaking as she was driving, and I couldn't tell quite what she was saying. She was looking over at people who were stopped, yielding, and saying something. And I asked her what it was, and she said, "I'm telling them to yield." And it was like making way for the king, or when a drill sergeant would say, "Make a hole," whenever we were in basic training. And Sydney was enjoying the fact that people were having to yield. And later I listened harder, and I could hear her saying, "That's right, yield. That's right, yield." Being subordinate or submissive is something that is foreign to us. We don't like it. We like it when other people are subordinating to us, or yielding to us, or surrendering to us. But we don't like the idea of that whenever we're the ones having to submit, to yield, to subordinate. This morning, in talking about what we're going to be discussing today, this is a subject that comes up, and there's a purpose to it. There's a reason for it, and I hope you're able to pick up on what Peter's saying to the first century Christians here. He's talking to scattered Christians in this time and in this book who are living in difficult and evolving situations, not unlike what we're dealing with today. And he's telling them that God has equipped them and prepared them to live in tough situations. We are equipped and we're prepared, and we have the ability to endure tough things, difficult things. Americans don't like to be told what to do, and it's starting to show. We see people protesting in Michigan. They're protesting some of the rulings that the governor has made in that state, and people are unhappy. It's not just Michigan, though. It's happening everywhere. People are not enjoying being told what to do. They've about worn through their patience in this shelter-in-place time that we're in, and they're ready to get out and live their lives for lots of reasons, economic motivations, just being cooped up, whatever. But people are about to the end of what they want to do. And I think Peter here in 1 Peter chapter 2 has something to tell us about how we should respond in a similar situation. We don't want to be told what to do, but God is in the business of telling us what to do. And here through Peter in chapter 2, he tells the first century Christians what they should do in this tough time. Starting in verse 13, if you would, look at that with me. "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority, or to the governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. Submit, it says, submit to every authority. In the original language, it's not every authority, or it's not even the word authority. It's submit to man-made creation. Submit to the authority that is instituted. Submit to whatever man has made and is in charge. And why? Why should we submit? What's the reason? What's the motivation? Why should first century Christians submit to this authority? Because we've already submitted to God's authority. We already are obedient to God. Because God reigns over our lives as Christians, we should submit to these authorities. There's a purpose. There's a reason. It reveals the character of God. I'm not going to tell you that sometimes there aren't conflicts between what the government asks us to do and what we as Christians should do. In fact, Peter himself struggled with this conflict in Acts chapter 5 when he asked himself, should I obey God or should I obey man? In preaching the gospel, he was told by the authorities of his time not to do that, and he asks himself that question. So there's going to be times whenever certainly the government could put us in a position where we have to choose, but that's not the time we're in right now. We're in the time that submitting to our government and submitting to authorities is revealing, it reveals God through that submission. He's asking these first century Christians to do that. Peter is. And at the time, the leader of the world is Nero. Nero was a difficult and not loved person and certainly persecuted his share of Christians. So why is he asking the first century Christians to do this? And why is he asking us to do it as well? Because we live this way to reveal God's character. God is more concerned about our character than about our comfort. I'm going to say that again. God is more concerned about our character than our comfort. And it was true then that by submitting, it was going to be at a cost to their comfort, but it was going to reveal God's character. God is building our character now, even in these uncomfortable moments that we're in here in Bentonville. Nothing like the first century Christians that Peter is talking to, but he's revealing his character through our uncomfort right now. If everyone were submissive, I want you to think about this. If everyone had that idea and that attitude that they were going to be submissive to authority and to law, there would be no need for prisons. There would be no need for policemen if we all had this idea that we were going to be submissive to authority. In Romans, I believe in chapter 12, it says there was no authority but that which God established. The reason why we submit to these authorities is because God established these authorities. God's in control of these authorities. So as Christians, we're to submit to them. We're to submit to the law. We are presently submitting to all kinds of instructions. People at the beginning said, well, I'm not going to obey this if it means I can't go worship. I'm going to go worship. And that's not what the government's telling us. The government's not telling us not to worship. We here are today worshiping. I've kind of gotten into the rhythm of what communion is like now, listening to Dennis or Cliff or whomever shares with us a message on Sunday mornings. I've gotten into the rhythm of listening to songs previously recorded in almost a robot voice. I don't know whether or not you guys are experiencing that too, but at least through my television, it sounds like a synthesized voice. But we're singing along with Mr. Roboto every morning whenever we worship on Sundays. The government didn't tell us not to worship. It said not to gather. And in doing so, we reveal the character of God. Because the character of God is to love, and love protects. And it's a very protecting thing that we're doing by making this sacrifice, submitting in this way to this authority, and not gathering together, because we're not putting people at risk by doing it. I don't think for a minute that this is the new normal and this is the way we're going to live forever. But right now, this is what we're to do, and we're to submit to this authority. He goes on to say, follow along with me if you would. For it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Live as free men, but do not use your freedom to cover up for evil. Live as servants of God. Servants of God. This is a word actually in the original Greek that is translated servants of God, but it's the word slave. It's the way that we live. In living this way as servants of God and slaves to God, and being submissive to rulers and authorities, we're revealing the character of God. We're honoring God. He goes on to say, show proper respect to everyone. Everyone. It's an absolute proper respect. In the Greek, it's just a word that means honor or attaching worth to something. You know what something is worth today by how much we pay for it. And you think about the things that you have paid, the things that you've paid for, and the things that you've loved, items that were your own personal possessions that you paid for. You knew what they were worth because you bought them. We've all purchased things in our lives. I remember the first car that I purchased myself. I loved that car. It was just a hunk of metal, but it was my hunk of metal. And I knew what it was worth because I made payments on it and I paid for it. We know as Christians what our worth is because God sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for our sins. Worth is how much something is paid for. And in our case, our souls were paid for by the blood of Christ. We know that worth. He goes on after he says, show proper respect for everyone, with these other present tense verbs. These, I call them keep on verbs, because they mean keep on doing what you're doing. He says, I'm going to start in the beginning of, or at verse 17, show proper respect for everyone. Love the brotherhood. Present tense. Love the brotherhood. Keep on loving the brotherhood. Fear God. Keep on fearing God. And lastly, honor the king. Keep on honoring the king. These are present tense verbs that he's using here, and he's using them intentionally. Do it as you have done it. Continue to do it. Respect for God or fear for God. I try to reconcile what it means to fear God, what that language means. Does it mean we should be afraid of God? I remember as a kid when I was growing up, there were three brothers that were older than me and a sister that was younger than me. So what it meant was, as each of the brothers left because they were married or went off to school or whatever they did, the responsibility then fell to the younger brother. And the brother that was just older than me, Daryl, was really good at not doing very well some of the things my dad wanted to have done. Chopping wood was one of them. He was not good at chopping wood. Intentionally, he was not good at chopping wood. And so my dad let me chop wood. In the beginning, as like a 10-year-old kid, the idea of swinging an axe and chopping wood was a crazy, awesome idea. I really liked the idea. I thought it was fun. You soon realize, 10, 11, 12, that the calluses on your hands and the volume of wood my dad could acquire to be chopped was no longer fun. It was a chore. It was something I was very good at. And my dad would like to sit out on the swing and watch me. And he knew that by doing this, it motivated me to do it more. But it wasn't just his appreciation that motivated me to do it more. It was because he asked me to do it. And it was clear that if I didn't do it, there would be consequences. Those consequences were, and the fear of those consequences were very motivating. And they motivated me to do it. Later in life, as I grew to be a young married man and a father of my own, and my dad still had need for somebody to bring up wood and to chop wood, I did those things that he needed to be done. I did those things whenever I visited that needed to be done, not out of a motivation of fear, but out of a motivation of respect. This idea of this present tense word of fearing God is a blended meaning. It means to have a healthy respect for God. It means to have a healthy respect for God akin to that fear that I just described, but it's motivating. Motivating to do what's right before God out of a fear or respect for God. And then lastly, he says, honor the king. And keep in mind the context here. He's talking about how Christians honor the king and how Christians live in a hostile world. Here we've got this authority, Nero at the time, who is hostile toward Christians specifically. But we're to honor the king because it's the character of God. That's a character attribute of God, honoring the king. It reveals that character. We need to count on God to take care of the rulers and the authorities of the world. And that's why we pray for them. In 1 Peter chapter 2, we're told to pray for kings and those that have been put in positions of authority. We're supposed to do that because we want what's best for them. Does it mean we agree with them? Maybe not. But we're supposed to pray for them. And we're supposed to know that God's in control. It's an idea that was really pervasive throughout the book of Daniel. Daniel recognized and surrendered to that idea that God was in control. And he was to honor whomever was king. And he served more than one. In tough situations, our response reflects the character of God. Do that and people notice. And God is glorified. You know, as I think about all the different sacrifices that are being made right now, as I think of how my life has changed and how difficult things are, some of the things that we're dealing with here in our family, some of the things that we're dealing with our extended family, and how tough things can be. I'm reminded of these first century Christians that were scattered and were living through very tough situations. And Peter's instruction to them was to submit to authority, to submit and to love their brothers, to submit and to fear God, to submit and to honor the king. And I spend a lot of time in this room now. It's weird because we've lived in this house for 14 years and this is the room easily I've spent the least amount of time in, with the exception of maybe my kids' individual rooms. But over the course of the last several weeks, I have been in this room an awful lot, 8 to 10 hours a day. I've got a dress shirt on and a sweatshirt on over the top of it. I've got a ball cap on most days like this. I'm wearing jogging pants right now and no shoes. And this is how I work, and this is how I teach Bible class. We're in a weird time. We're in a difficult time. We need to have faith in something bigger than us. Faith in something and confidence in something bigger than us. Peter asks this of the first century Christians, and really he's asking us through time today to do the same thing. Submit to the things you can't control. Submit to those things. You know, I don't know what's on your mind today. I don't know the different things that you're dealing with, but I'm confident that whatever it is, whatever difficult things that you're struggling with, there's going to be an end to those things. Ultimately, there's going to be a finality to them, and they're going to be over. Just like this situation that we're in, it's going to be over. But in the meantime, our behavior and the way we face obstacles is very revealing of the character of God. I hope you'll keep that in mind. I hope this study of 1 Peter has been a blessing to you so far. Next week, we'll continue with another thought from the book of 1 Peter. I hope you're reading it. I wish you all well. I pray for you, and I hope you're praying for us. Missy and I can certainly use your prayers right now. So until next week, I hope you guys have a good week. We miss you. We look forward to being back with you again soon. And thanks again. Have a good week.